Picture this. You're standing in the middle of Africa, surrounded by 6 million hidden explosives. One wrong step could trigger a chain reaction that would obliterate everything within hundreds of meters. Now imagine being asked to build a 1,000-kilometer railway through this deadly landscape. Most countries said no. Most companies walked away. But one nation said yes, and what happened next would reshape an entire continent's future. This is the story of the Benguela Railway, a century-old dream, a decade-long nightmare, and an engineering miracle that perhaps only one country on Earth had the courage to complete. To understand why this railway matters, we need to talk about Angola. Tucked away on Africa's southwestern coast, Angola seems blessed by geography. 1,600 kilometers of Atlantic coastline, borders touching the Democratic Republic of Congo to the north and Namibia to the south. It's a nation positioned perfectly for trade, for shipping, for connecting the heart of Africa to the rest of the world. But geography is only half the story. Beneath Angola's soil lies something even more valuable: oil. Vast reserves that make it sub-Saharan Africa's second-largest petroleum producer. Add to that diamond deposits ranked among the top 10 globally, and you'd think Angola would be an economic powerhouse. Instead, it's a cautionary tale. For decades, Angola's economy has been a one-trick pony, dangerously dependent on oil exports. When global prices surge, the country breathes. When they crash, the entire nation gasps for air. This fragility isn't just bad policy, it's a wound that never healed from a war that consumed the country for nearly 3 decades. The Angolan Civil War erupted in 1975, right as the nation gained independence from Portugal. What followed was 27 years of devastating conflict that left the country in ruins. Cities were shattered, villages were abandoned, and the infrastructure that once connected the nation? Obliterated. Among the casualties was the Benguela Railway, a vital artery that had once carried goods and people across the country's interior. By the time peace finally arrived in 2002, this 1,300-kilometer line existed only in memory and rusted fragments. The railway bed had become a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. But the real nightmare wasn't the destroyed tracks. It was what lay beneath them. According to demining organizations, more than 10 million landmines were scattered across Angola by war's end. Along the Benguela Railway corridor alone, at least 6 million remained active, an average of over 4,000 deadly devices for every single kilometer of track. Think about that for a moment. 4,000 landmines per kilometer for 1,300 kilometers. This wasn't just a reconstruction project, it was a suicide mission disguised as civil engineering. Angola's government knew the railway had to be rebuilt. It wasn't optional. Without it, the country's resource-rich interior would remain cut off from coastal ports. Economic recovery would be impossible. Development would stall before it even began. So they did what any struggling nation would do. They asked for help. First, they turned to neighboring countries, then to Western nations and corporations. Angola needed partners with deep pockets, advanced technology, and the willingness to take on extraordinary risk. The response was deafening silence. From a business perspective, the rejection made perfect sense. Angola in 2002 was a nightmare scenario for private investment. The economy was in shambles. Legal frameworks were barely functional. Roads were impassable. Rural areas were minefields, literally. Any company considering the Benguela Railway faced a terrifying cost-benefit analysis. Clearing millions of landmines would require years and drain budgets before a single rail tie was laid. Construction timelines couldn't be estimated with any accuracy. One accidental detonation could kill workers, destroy equipment, and trigger lawsuits that would bankrupt the entire project. For profit-driven Western firms, the math was simple: massive risk, minimal return, uncertain timeline. Pass. Angola seemed destined to remain fractured, its interior wealth forever trapped behind a barrier of buried explosives. Then they looked east. China in the early 2000s was experiencing something unprecedented in modern history, an economic boom of staggering proportions. Factories were multiplying, cities were expanding, and all of it required one thing above all else: energy. Oil consumption was skyrocketing, but there was a problem. The Middle East, traditionally the world's gas station, was becoming increasingly unstable. Supply disruptions were a constant threat. China needed alternatives, reliable partners who could guarantee long-term energy security. Africa's western coast offered exactly that: high-quality crude oil, stable shipping routes, and most importantly, nations desperate for development partners who wouldn't attach political strings to their assistance. This is where Angola entered the picture. Chinese officials saw what Western companies missed: not a hopeless case, but an opportunity. Angola had resources China needed. China had the technology, capital, and most crucially, the willingness to take on projects others considered too risky. Starting in 2002, Angolan delegations began making regular trips to Beijing. Conversations turned into negotiations. Negotiations turned into something revolutionary: the oil for loans model. Here's how it worked. China would provide loans and engineering expertise for massive infrastructure projects. Angola would repay those loans not with cash they didn't have, but with oil they had in abundance. No upfront capital required. No impossible debt payments. Just resources exchanged for reconstruction. By 2004, the deal was struck. Among the flagship projects was the complete reconstruction of the Benguela Railway. China would take on the challenge everyone else had refused. And with that decision, one of the most dangerous construction projects in modern history began. Act 4. Dancing with Death. The Chinese engineering teams that arrived in Angola weren't naive. They knew about the landmines. They understood the risks. But honestly, nothing could have fully prepared them for the reality on the ground. 6 million unexploded devices scattered across 1,344 kilometers. International agencies called it one of the most heavily mined regions on planet Earth. Every shovel of dirt, every foundation dug, every rail laid required clearance teams to work first. Painstakingly slow, methodically careful, knowing that one mistake meant death. In many sections, demining took longer than actual construction. Areas covering just a few dozen kilometers required months, sometimes over a year, of clearance before workers could even begin rebuilding the railway bed. China deployed advanced mine detection equipment, blast-resistant protective gear, and specialized plowing machines designed to trigger explosives remotely. They used mechanized mowing and excavation to minimize human exposure. Every possible precaution was taken. But the mines were only one challenge. The Benguela railway route cuts through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Africa. Plains give way to highlands. Mountains rise into gorges. Dense tropical shrubland stretches for kilometers, hiding remnants of war beneath thick vegetation. Daytime temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, 104 Fahrenheit. Machinery broke down faster. Workers faced constant heat exhaustion. Then came the rainy season, when torrential downpours halted construction entirely and floods washed away completed sections overnight. Remember, this corridor had been a battlefield. Craters pocked the landscape. Ruins of bombed-out structures littered the route. In many places, there was no trace of the original railway left, just destruction that had to be cleared before anything new could be built. Valleys required bridges, mountains required tunnels, soft soil required reinforcement with stone and sand piles. Highland areas needed retaining walls to prevent subsidence. And because Angola's post-war industrial capacity was virtually zero, almost all materials had to be imported. What should have taken 3 years in China took 10 in Angola, but in 2014, it was done. Act 5. Resurrection. On February 1st, 2015, something remarkable happened. For the first time in over 40 years, a train moved smoothly along the full length of the Benguela Railway. At the opening ceremony, the director of Angola's Railway Bureau stood before the assembled crowd and said something that would echo across Africa. Perhaps only China in the entire world would dare to build this railway. It wasn't hyperbole, it was recognition of what had actually been accomplished. Since that day, the railway has been running for a full decade. And the transformation it's brought to Angola is nothing short of extraordinary. The line now connects the coastal port of Lobito with Angola's resource-rich interior and beyond, reaching minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Since resuming international trade operations in 2018, the railway has moved over 360,000 tons of freight. Consider what this means in practical terms. Before the railway's reconstruction, transporting goods from Mexico province to the coast cost over $1,000 per ton. Today, a few dozen dollars. That drop in transportation costs rippled through the entire regional economy. Food became cheaper. Agricultural products could reach markets before spoiling. Small businesses could afford to trade across provinces. Local retail sectors came alive. For ordinary Angolans, the impact has been even more direct. Over 4 million passengers have traveled on the Benguela Railway since it reopened. Journey times between major cities have been cut in half. Tickets cost less than bus fares. Think about what this means for someone working odd jobs or running a small street stall. Suddenly, you can travel to find work, visit family, transport goods to better markets. Opportunities that were impossible before are now routine. Small markets have sprung up around railway stations. Where foot traffic flows, commerce follows. Street vendors who once struggled now have steady customers. For many Angolans, the railway represents the first real chance they've had to build a stable livelihood. Calling it the lifeline of Angola's post-war recovery isn't dramatic language. It's simple fact. Act 6, the bigger picture. But let's zoom out for a moment. Why did China really do this? Yes, there was oil. China needed energy security, and Angola could provide it. That partnership has been incredibly successful. Today, Angola ranks among China's top 3 oil suppliers. But the Benguela Railway was never just about one train line in one country. In 2013, China announced the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious strategy to rebuild global trade networks and connect markets across continents. Africa, with its young population, untapped resources, and critical infrastructure gaps, was always going to be central to that vision. The Benguela Railway became a proof of concept. If China could rebuild a railway through 6 million landmines, what else could it accomplish? Today, Chinese infrastructure projects dot the African continent. The Tazara Railway connecting East and Southern Africa. Massive port developments, highway networks, power plants, telecommunication systems. Critics argue this is debt-trap diplomacy, that China is buying influence. Supporters point to the roads, railways, and hospitals that now exist where nothing stood before. The truth, as always, is complicated. But here's what's undeniable. When Angola needed help, most of the world said no. China said yes, and delivered. 10 years. $1.8 billion. 6 million landmines. One railway that refused to die. The Benguela Railway isn't just a transportation project. It's a statement about what's possible when risk is embraced rather than avoided. When long-term vision trumps short-term profit calculations. When reconstruction is seen as partnership, not charity. Today, trains run where war once raged. Markets thrive where minefields once killed. A nation moves forward where it once seemed permanently frozen. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. Not about China's engineering prowess or Angola's resilience, though both are remarkable. It's about what happens when someone finally says yes to a challenge everyone else called impossible. Because sometimes, the railways nobody else will build become the ones that change everything.